Welcome to Biomed Explorer. In this video, I'd like to talk about two tiny organs sitting quietly on top of your kidneys, doing far more work than their size would ever suggest, the adrenal glands. I'll cover what these glands actually are, how they're secretly built from two completely different organs fused into one, how they trigger the fight-or-flight reaction in less than a second, the slower hidden dial that quietly manages stress over days and weeks, what happens when the system breaks down and the daily habits slowly straining it without you ever realizing it? So, let's get started. What are the adrenal glands? Most people have heard the phrase adrenaline rush without ever really knowing where that adrenaline actually comes from. That's the adrenal glands, but here's something that surprises a lot of people. Calling them a single organ is technically wrong. Each adrenal gland sits like a small triangular cap directly on top of a kidney, and inside that single capsule are two entirely separate organs that just happen to share the same address. The outer layer, called the cortex, is glandular tissue built from cholesterol-derived steroid hormones. The inner core, called the medulla, is actually nervous tissue, wired directly into your sympathetic nervous system. One reacts in milliseconds, the other works over hours and days, and together they form one of the strangest partnerships in the entire body. The cortex, a three-story chemical factory. Let's start with the cortex, since it's the larger of the two regions and does the most varied work. And here's a detail most people never picture correctly. The cortex isn't one uniform layer. It's built from three distinct zones stacked on top of each other like floors in a factory, each one manufacturing a completely different hormone. The outermost floor, the zona glomerulosa, produces aldosterone, a hormone whose entire job is deciding how much sodium and water your kidneys hold on to, which in turn quietly controls your blood pressure. The middle floor, the zona fasciculata, produces cortisol, probably the most talked about hormone in the entire body, responsible for managing blood sugar, metabolism, and your body's response to prolonged stress. And the innermost floor, the zona reticularis, produces small amounts of androgens, precursor sex hormones that get converted into more familiar forms elsewhere in the body. Each zone works almost independently, quietly manufacturing its own hormone and releasing it straight into the bloodstream, and together these three floors keep your blood pressure, blood sugar, and stress response all running in the background, all day, every day, without you ever noticing the machinery behind it. The medulla, the instant switch. Now let's talk about the second organ hiding inside that same capsule, the medulla. And unlike the cortex, which works through slow chemical signaling, the medulla is wired directly into your nervous system, which is exactly why it can react so much faster. The moment your brain perceives a threat, whether that's a car swerving into your lane or simply a loud, unexpected noise, a signal races down your spinal cord and directly into the medulla, triggering an almost instantaneous release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, better known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Within seconds, your heart rate climbs, your airways widen, blood gets redirected away from digestion and toward your muscles, and your senses sharpen, all so you can either fight or run, whichever the moment calls for. It's a strange kind of communication when you think about it, a chemical hormone being triggered not by another hormone, but directly by a nerve signal, almost like a fire alarm wired straight into a sprinkler system rather than requiring someone to call the fire department first. The hidden dial that manages long-term stress. Here's a detail that catches almost everyone off guard. Adrenaline handles the sudden second-to-second emergencies, but it doesn't manage stress that lingers for days, weeks, or months. That job belongs to an entirely separate, slower circuit called the HPA axis, running quietly between your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and the adrenal cortex. When stress persists, your hypothalamus releases a signal that prompts the pituitary gland to release ACTH, which then travels through the bloodstream and instructs the adrenal cortex to keep producing cortisol. Unlike adrenaline, cortisol doesn't cause any sensation you can consciously feel in the moment. It rises and falls gradually over hours, quietly keeping blood sugar elevated and available for a body that believes it's still under threat. This is exactly why chronic stress feels so different from a sudden scare. One is a lightning-fast nervous system reflex, and the other is a slow chemical dial that your body simply forgets to turn back down when the stress never actually ends. When the system breaks down, given how much depends on this small pair of glands, it's no surprise that when something goes wrong, the effects tend to be significant. Addison's disease happens when the adrenal cortex stops producing enough cortisol and aldosterone, usually because the immune system has mistakenly attacked the gland itself. The result is a slow decline marked by fatigue, weight loss, and low blood pressure that can, in severe cases, escalate into a life-threatening adrenal crisis. Cushing's syndrome sits at the opposite end of the spectrum entirely, caused by chronically excessive cortisol, whether from a tumor or from long-term steroid medication, gradually reshaping the body with weight gain, rounded facial features, and elevated blood sugar over months rather than days. And then there's a term you've probably heard thrown around online, adrenal fatigue, the idea that the glands simply get worn out from too much stress and stop producing hormones properly. It's a compelling story, but endocrine researchers have found no scientific basis for it as an actual medical condition, and healthy adrenal glands appear capable of producing cortisol more or less without limit. The real risk in believing it is that it can quietly delay someone from getting checked for what's actually going on, whether that's a genuine adrenal disorder or something else entirely. Daily habits quietly straining the system. Even without a diagnosed disorder, certain everyday patterns keep this system working overtime. Chronic unresolved stress is the most obvious one, since it keeps the HPA axis switched on far longer than it was ever designed for, holding cortisol elevated well past the point where any real threat still exists. Irregular sleep quietly disrupts the system in a different way, since cortisol naturally follows its own daily rhythm, rising sharply in the morning to help you wake up and gradually tapering off by night, and a disrupted sleep schedule throws that entire rhythm out of sync. And relying on stimulants to power through exhaustion rather than actually resting keeps the nervous system leaning on the same fight-or-flight circuitry that was only ever meant for short bursts, not for getting through an entire afternoon. The three main jobs of the adrenal glands. So now that we've covered both organs hiding inside this one small gland, let's bring it together. Between the cortex and the medulla, your adrenal glands perform three main jobs every single day. The first job belongs to the cortex alone, steadily producing the steroid hormones that manage blood pressure, blood sugar, and long-term stress in the background. The second job belongs to the medulla, standing ready to trigger an instant whole-body response the moment real danger appears. The third job belongs to the two working together, coordinating a system that can react in milliseconds when it needs to, and quietly sustain that response for days if the threat doesn't go away. Wrapping it up. There you have it. The adrenal glands, two organs fused into one, sitting quietly on top of your kidneys, one wired for instant reflex, the other built for slow, sustained chemical management. Together, they decide how your body handles everything from a sudden scare to a stressful month at work, almost entirely without your conscious input. The adrenal glands may be something you rarely think about until stress starts to feel unmanageable, but every single day they're quietly deciding how your body responds to the world around it. Thanks for watching, and Biomed Explorer uploads a new science video every day. Please subscribe and share.